billionaire CEO Victoria Kensington offered a desperate single dad $2 million to portray her son's missing father. Anyone else would grab that cash and perform flawlessly. However, after gazing deeply into an innocent child's eyes, Ethan chose an unthinkable path. He refused to lie. Ethan Callahan wiped the sawdust from his calloused hands, staring up at the sprawling, glass and steel architectural marvel perched on the edge of Lake Washington. As a high-end custom carpenter, he was used to the extravagant homes of Seattle's elite, but the Kensington estate was a fortress of cold, calculated wealth, and its owner, Victoria Kensington, was the Ice Queen reigning over it all. At 33, Victoria was the CEO of Kensington Global Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar shipping and supply chain empire. She was notoriously ruthless, a woman who fired board members over breakfast and finalized corporate acquisitions before her second espresso. But beyond the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, Victoria harbored a fiercely guarded private life and a desperate, ticking clock. Ethan didn't know about her corporate deadlines. He only knew about his own. 3 years ago, his wife, Sarah, had lost a grueling battle with leukemia, leaving Ethan to raise their 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, entirely on his own. Despite working 80-hour weeks, the staggering medical debt from Sarah's treatments had finally caught up to him. The bank had issued a final notice of foreclosure on their modest home in Bellevue. In less than 30 days, Ethan and Chloe would be out on the street. He was at the Kensington estate to install custom mahogany library shelving, a lucrative contract that would buy him maybe another month. Chloe was with him that Tuesday, sitting quietly in the corner of the vast, empty room, coloring in her sketchbook. That was when Victoria walked in. She didn't storm in with an entourage as she usually did. She moved silently, her sharp gaze locking onto Ethan. But she wasn't looking at the shelving. She was watching Ethan interact with Chloe. She watched as Ethan paused his heavy labor, knelt down to eye level, and patiently listened as his daughter explained her drawing. She saw the gentle strength in his demeanor, the unconditional safety he projected. "Mr. Callahan," Victoria's voice cut through the quiet hum of the estate, sharp and commanding. Ethan stood, dusting off his jeans. "Ms. Kensington, the library will be finished by Thursday." "I don't care about the library," she said, stepping closer. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood. "I care about discretion, and I care about a very specific set of skills. I've run a background check on you, Ethan. I know about the medical debt. I know about the foreclosure. I know you need exactly $340,000 to clear your accounts and save your home." Ethan stiffened, his protective instincts flaring as he stepped slightly in front of his daughter. "How do you know that? And what does my financial situation have to do with my contracting work?" "Nothing," Victoria replied coldly. "But it has everything to do with a job offer. A different kind of job. I need you in my home office. Now." 10 minutes later, Ethan sat across from Victoria's massive obsidian desk. A thick legal document sat between them. "My grandfather, Silas Kensington, was a deeply traditional, archaic man," Victoria began, not mincing words. "He built this company from nothing, and before he died, he placed the controlling 51% of the company shares into a trust. I am set to inherit those shares and solidify my absolute control over the company on my 34th birthday, which is exactly 6 months from now." She paused, her jaw tightening. "However, the trust contains a morality clause. To inherit, I must demonstrate that I am providing a stable, 2-parent familial environment for my heir. If I fail, the shares revert to my cousin, Preston, a parasitic incompetent who will dismantle the company and sell it for parts within a year. Ethan frowned. You want me to build you a nursery? I want you to be a father, Victoria corrected, her eyes piercing his. 5 years ago, I had a brief relationship. The man vanished the moment I told him I was pregnant. My son, Oliver, is 5 years old. He has never met his father. Recently, the board and my cousin Preston have started aggressively prying into my personal life, demanding to meet the man I claimed was living overseas. Furthermore, Oliver has begun acting out. The child psychologists say he is suffering from severe abandonment issues regarding his missing father. She pushed the thick contract across the desk. This is a non-disclosure agreement and a personal services contract, she said, her tone entirely devoid of emotion. You will pretend to be David, Oliver's father. You will move into the east wing of this estate with your daughter. You will attend 3 public galas, a series of staged paparazzi outings, and Sunday dinners with my uncle and the board. Most importantly, you will spend 1 hour every evening with Oliver, playing the role of the devoted father who finally returned from his deep-sea engineering contracts in the North Sea. Ethan stared at her, horrified. You want me to lie to a 5-year-old boy? I am paying you to play a role, she countered fiercely. For 18 months. When the contract ends, David will tragically die in a corporate accident overseas. Oliver will get closure, the board will be satisfied, I will have the company, and you. She placed a certified cashier's check on top of the contract. You will receive $2 million, tax-free. Your debt will be erased today. Your daughter's future will be secured forever. Ethan looked at the check. $2 million. It was enough to save his house, enough to pay for Chloe's college, enough to ensure he would never have to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, terrified of the next morning. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the promises he made to take care of their little girl. With a trembling hand, Ethan picked up the pen. The transition into the Kensington estate was jarring. Within 48 hours, Ethan and Chloe were moved into a luxury suite that was larger than their entire house in Bellevue. Victoria's public relations team immediately went to work, outfitting Ethan in tailored suits and casually expensive weekend wear. He was handed a 30-page dossier on David. He had to memorize details about fictional deep-sea drilling rigs, a fake childhood in Aberdeen, Scotland, and carefully constructed reasons for his 5-year absence. The boy is fragile, Victoria warned him outside the playroom doors on the 3rd day. She wore a tailored white suit, looking more like a general sending a soldier into combat than a mother. He asks questions. Stick to the script. You were isolated on a rig. You didn't have communication. You wanted to come back, but you were legally bound to your overseas contracts. Do not deviate. Ethan took a deep breath, his stomach twisting into knots. He pushed open the heavy oak doors. The playroom was massive, filled with every educational toy, train set, and arcade machine money could buy. But in the center of it all sat a very small, very quiet little boy. Oliver had pale skin, his mother's dark hair, and a profound sadness in his eyes that no 5-year-old should possess. He was clutching a wooden toy boat, staring at Ethan as he walked in. Ethan knelt down on the plush carpet, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Hey, Oliver," Ethan said softly. The boy didn't move. He just stared, his eyes wide and searching. "Mother says you're my father. She says your name is David." Ethan's heart broke. He had raised Chloe. He knew the absolute, unconditional trust a child placed in the adults around them. He saw the desperate, fragile hope trembling in Oliver's small voice. The boy was putting the entire weight of his short, lonely life onto Ethan's shoulders, waiting for the magic words that would fix his broken world. "Stick to the script," Victoria's voice echoed in his head. "You were on a rig. You couldn't call." Ethan opened his mouth to tell the lie. He thought of the $2 million. He thought of the foreclosure notices. Did you stay away because I was bad?" Oliver whispered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Did I do something wrong?" That was it. The script shattered in Ethan's mind. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He realized in that split second that while Victoria Kensington might understand corporate acquisitions and hostile takeovers, she understood absolutely nothing about the human heart. If Ethan played this role, he wouldn't be saving this boy. He would be setting him up for a catastrophic, world-destroying heartbreak 18 months from now, when David inevitably died. Ethan looked back at the doorway. He knew Victoria was standing just out of sight, listening through the crack in the door. Ethan looked back at Oliver, leaning in closer, his voice steady and incredibly gentle. "Oliver," Ethan said, reaching out to gently touch the edge of the wooden boat. "I need to tell you a secret. A very important secret just between you and me." Oliver sniffled, leaning in. "My name isn't David," Ethan said, his voice ringing clearly in the quiet room. "My name is Ethan." From the hallway there was a sharp gasp, followed by the sound of heels suddenly stopping. "I'm not your father, buddy," Ethan continued, ignoring the impending hurricane outside the door. "I'm a carpenter. I build things. And your mum loves you very, very much. She loves you so much that she was worried you were lonely. So she hired me to come live here and be your friend." Oliver blinked, his little brow furrowing in confusion. "You're not my dad?" "No," Ethan said firmly, but with a warm smile. "But I have a little girl named Chloe who lives right down the hall. And I promise you, from today on, I am going to be the absolute best friend you've ever had. We can build tree houses. We can fix that boat of yours. But I will never, ever lie to you. Deal?" Oliver stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. The crushing weight of the expectation seemed to lift from the boy's shoulders. The anxiety of having to impress a long-lost father vanished. Instead, he looked at Ethan with a spark of genuine, childlike curiosity. "Can you really build a tree house?" Oliver asked softly. "The best one you've ever seen," Ethan promised. Before Oliver could reply, the playroom doors were violently pushed open. Victoria stood there, her face pale with an apocalyptic fury. Her eyes were blazing, her hands trembling with sheer rage. "Ethan!" she hissed, her voice a lethal whisper. "A word!" "Now!" Ethan gave Oliver a reassuring wink, stood up, and followed the billionaire CEO out into the sprawling hallway. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Victoria erupted. "Are you out of your mind?" she snapped, stepping into his personal space, her composure entirely shattered. "You just breached a hermetically sealed non-disclosure agreement in less than 3 minutes. I will destroy you, Callahan. I will take back the money. I will bury you in litigation until your grandchildren are bankrupt, and I will have you thrown out on the street." "Do it," Ethan fired back, his own voice rising, completely unfazed by her wealth or power. "Fire me, sue me, but I am not going to inflict psychological torture on a 5-year-old boy to secure your corporate throne. You want me to play the devoted partner for the cameras? Fine. You want me to smile for your board of directors? Done. But behind closed doors with that child, I am Ethan. We do this with honesty, or I walk right now." Victoria opened her mouth to fire him on the spot. She was going to ruin him. But suddenly, The shrill ring of her secure private line interrupted the screaming match. Panting with rage, Victoria pulled the phone from her pocket and answered it. "What?" she barked. As she listened, all the color drained from her face. The furious billionaire was suddenly replaced by a woman trapped in a corner. "He's where?" she whispered. "How did he get past the front gate?" She slowly lowered the phone, looking at Ethan with a mixture of hatred and absolute panic. "My cousin Preston is pulling into the driveway," she said, her voice shaking. "He brought a photographer from the Seattle Tribune and 2 members of the trust committee. They received an anonymous tip that the father of my child was finally on the premises." Ethan crossed his arms. "Sounds like you need me, Victoria, but we play by my rules now." The grand foyer of the Kensington estate was a cavern of imported Italian marble and vaulted ceilings, designed to make anyone who entered feel incredibly small. But as Preston Kensington strode through the massive double doors, he looked like a man who already owned the place. Preston was a perfectly manicured shark in a bespoke Tom Ford suit. Flanking him were 2 senior members of the Kensington Global Trust Committee and a nervous-looking man clutching a digital recorder, undoubtedly the reporter from the Seattle Tribune. Victoria stood at the top of the grand sweeping staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her pristine composure was a masterclass in deception. Beside her stood Ethan, still wearing his faded denim jeans, a plain grey Henley, and heavy leather work boots. There had been no time to change him into the tailored Armani suits her PR team had purchased. He looked exactly like what he was, a working-class carpenter. "Victoria, darling," Preston called out, his voice dripping with faux affection that echoed off the marble. "I do apologize for the unannounced intrusion. But when I heard the rumors that the elusive phantom father had finally materialized on American soil, I simply couldn't wait for Sunday dinner. The board has been so terribly anxious to meet the man who holds the key to your stability." Preston's eyes flicked to Ethan, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second as he took in Ethan's rugged, unpolished appearance. This wasn't the suave international businessman Preston had expected to tear down. "Preston," Victoria said coldly, descending the stairs with Ethan, a half step behind her. "Your desperation is showing. Bringing a reporter into my private residence is a new low, even for you." "Transparency, Victoria," Preston countered smoothly, gesturing to the journalist. "The shareholders value transparency, and since you're set to inherit 51% of the company based on a strict morality and family stability clause, we need to ensure this isn't just another one of your corporate smoke screens. So this must be the famous David." Preston stepped forward, extending a hand to Ethan with a predatory gleam in his eye. "Preston Kensington, I hear you've been busy on deep-sea rigs. Fascinating work. Tell me, what's the current barrel output of the North Sea operation you were supposedly managing?" It was a trap, a highly technical question meant to instantly expose a fraud. Victoria held her breath, her fingernails digging painfully into her palms. She hadn't briefed Ethan on petroleum output metrics. Ethan didn't take Preston's hand. Instead, he looked the billionaire up and down with calm, unshakable authority. "I don't track the oil, Preston," Ethan said, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the room. "I track the structural integrity of the steel, keeping the ocean from swallowing the crew. You want to talk about tensile strength under deep water pressure? We can do that. You want to talk about the catastrophic failure rate of poorly maintained rig foundations because corporate executives like you cut corners on maintenance budgets? We can talk about that all day. But I don't peddle barrels." The reporter's eyes lit up, his recorder angled directly at Ethan. It was a brilliant pivot. Ethan had used his deep, authentic knowledge of structural building materials and applied it perfectly to the fiction of offshore engineering. Preston's jaw tightened. How very blue-collar of you. And yet, you abandoned your son for 5 years to stare at steel. Before Ethan could formulate a response to the venomous accusation, the sound of small, hurried footsteps echoed from the upper landing. Oliver appeared, clutching his wooden toy boat, his eyes wide as he took in the crowd of strangers. "Oliver," Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly. "Go back to the playroom, sweetheart." Preston saw his opening. He bypassed Victoria and looked directly up at the child. "Hello there, Oliver. Is this man your daddy? Did he finally come home to you?" Victoria closed her eyes. This was it. The empire was gone. Oliver was going to look at Ethan, a man who had explicitly told him just 10 minutes ago that he was not his father, and the entire lie would crumble on the marble floor. Oliver looked at Preston, then at the board members, and finally at Ethan. Ethan gave the boy a tiny, reassuring nod. "Honesty. He's not David," Oliver said, his small voice echoing clearly in the silent foyer. Preston barked a triumphant laugh, turning immediately to the trust committee members. "You heard it. The boy himself admits it. It's a fraud. Victoria hired a—" "He's Ethan," Oliver continued, gripping his boat. He marched down the stairs and walked right up to Ethan, wrapping his small arms around Ethan's denim-clad leg. "He's not a ghost from the ocean. He's my Ethan. And he brought Chloe. And he's going to build me the biggest treehouse in the whole world." The foyer fell deathly silent. The reporter frantically scribbled in his notepad. Not a ghost. A builder. A grounded, real father figure. To the outside world, Oliver's innocent words didn't sound like the unmasking of a fraud. They sounded like a child lovingly rejecting a stiff, formal title for a warm, affectionate nickname. Preston was utterly baffled. "Wait, no, the boy said exactly what a child says when he finally feels safe," Ethan interrupted, placing a large, protective hand on Oliver's shoulder. He stared Preston down, his gaze lethal. "We're done here, Preston. The interview is over. I'm taking my son to the backyard to look at some lumber. Show yourselves out." Ethan turned his back on the billionaires, took Oliver's hand, and walked away. Victoria stood frozen, watching the man she had hired to lie brilliantly save her company with the absolute truth. Over the next 4 months, the atmosphere inside the Kensington estate fundamentally shifted. The cold, silent halls were frequently filled with the sound of Chloe and Oliver laughing. True to his word, Ethan spent every evening and weekend in the sprawling backyard, constructing a massive, multi-level treehouse in the branches of a giant western red cedar. Victoria found herself wandering out to the backyard more and more often. She traded her designer suits for cashmere sweaters and jeans. She sat on the patio with a glass of wine, watching Ethan patiently teach Oliver how to sand a piece of wood, or watching him lift Chloe onto his shoulders. Ethan had become the anchor of the estate. The media loved him. The rugged, eccentric builder narrative had played perfectly to the public, softening Victoria's ruthless corporate image. But behind closed doors, something much more dangerous was happening. The lines of the contract were blurring. Victoria and Ethan spent their late evenings talking in the kitchen, sharing quiet moments that felt terrifyingly real. Ethan learned about the crushing pressure Victoria had endured since childhood. Victoria learned about Sarah, the devastating grief of her loss, and the crippling medical debt from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center that had nearly ruined Ethan's life. But a billionaire's peace is never permanent. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 1 month before Victoria's 34th birthday, the day she was to officially inherit the controlling shares. Ethan was in the library when Victoria walked in. She wasn't wearing her newfound casual clothes. She was back in her sharp, defensive armor, a severe black suit. Her face was the color of ash. Preston called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, she said, her voice hollow. She dropped a thick manila folder onto the mahogany desk Ethan had built for her months ago. Ethan frowned, opening the folder. The letterhead at the top read, Kroll Corporate Investigations. Preston hired Kroll, Victoria whispered, sinking into a chair. They are the most ruthless private intelligence firm on the planet. They didn't just look for David. They looked for you. Ethan scanned the pages. His blood ran cold. There were photographs of his Bellevue house with the foreclosure sign. There were copies of Sarah's death certificate. There were redacted medical bills from Fred Hutchinson. And most damning of all, there were copies of the wire transfers from Kensington Global to Ethan's personal bank account, totaling exactly $340,000. Preston is presenting this to the trust committee tomorrow at 9 a.m., Victoria said, her eyes dead and defeated. He can prove I paid off your debt the exact week you moved in. He can prove you are Ethan Callahan, a widow from the suburbs, not the biological father of my child. The morality clause stipulates honesty and stability. I've breached it. It's over, Ethan. Preston wins. Ethan stared at the dossier. He thought about the $2 million he was promised at the end of the contract. It wouldn't matter now. If Victoria lost the company, Preston would void the contract and sue Ethan for the initial payoff. He and Chloe would be right back where they started. But as Ethan looked at Victoria, the woman who had let her guard down, the woman who had learned to laugh again, the woman who had become a fierce, loving presence in his daughter's life, he realized the money was the last thing he cared about. Get dressed, Ethan said quietly, closing the folder. We have somewhere to go. Ethan, there is nothing we can do. Victoria, Ethan said, his voice cutting through her panic with absolute certainty. Trust me. Get your coat. The next morning, the Kensington Global boardroom was a theatre of execution. Preston stood at the head of the massive glass table, flanked by his lawyers and the entire trust committee. The Kroll dossier was projected onto the wall for everyone to see. Victoria sat at the opposite end, completely silent, her face a mask of stone. Ethan sat beside her, wearing a simple navy suit. It is an open and shut case of gross corporate fraud, Preston sneered, pacing the room. Victoria has willfully deceived the board, the media, and this committee. The man sitting beside her is not the biological father of her child. He is a paid actor, a bankrupt carpenter bought and paid for to secure a multi-billion-dollar inheritance. I formally motion for the immediate revocation of Victoria's executive powers and the transfer of the Silas Kensington Trust to myself. A heavy silence fell over the room. The chairman of the trust committee, an elderly man named Harrison, sighed heavily. Victoria, Harrison said gently, the evidence here is overwhelming. The morality clause demands a stable, authentic, two-parent familial environment. By fabricating this man's identity, you have violated the foundational ethics of your grandfather's trust. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Victoria didn't speak. She looked at Ethan. Ethan stood up. He didn't look at the projection, and he didn't look at Preston. He looked directly at Harrison. Everything in that Kroll report is true, Ethan said. A gasp rippled through the boardroom. Preston grinned like a feral dog. My name is Ethan Callahan, Ethan continued, his voice steady. I am a carpenter. I was drowning in medical debt after watching my wife die of leukemia at Fred Hutchinson. I was desperate. And yes, initially, Victoria hired me to play a role. There you have it, Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the table. An admission of guilt. Sit down, Preston, Ethan snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. He turned back to the chairman. But what Preston's expensive investigators failed to understand is that life doesn't always stick to a contract. When I moved into that house, I refused to lie to Oliver. I told him exactly who I was. And because of that honesty, something real happened. Ethan reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a single embossed sheet of paper. He slid it across the glass table toward the chairman. "You want an authentic, stable, two-parent environment?" Ethan asked softly. "Read the paper, Harrison." Harrison picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the text. His brow furrowed in shock, and then a slow, genuine smile spread across his weathered face. "What is it?" Preston demanded, his confidence suddenly evaporating. "What is that?" "It appears, Preston," Harrison said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "that your Kroll investigators are exactly 12 hours behind." Harrison held the paper up. "This is a legally binding marriage certificate, filed and stamped by the King County Courthouse at exactly 8 p.m. last night," Harrison announced. "Victoria Kensington and Ethan Callahan are legally married. Furthermore, attached is a filed petition for the legal, mutual adoption of both Oliver and Ethan's daughter, Chloe." Preston's face drained of all blood. No, that's a sham. It's a defensive maneuver. The clause implies the biological father." "The clause implies no such thing, Preston," Harrison barked, his patience finally snapping. "Silas Kensington wrote that clause because he wanted Victoria to have a stable home, not a loveless transactional life. He wanted her to have a real family. And looking at this man, who had the courage to stand in front of this board and tell the absolute truth to protect his family, I'd say Victoria has fulfilled the spirit and the letter of the trust flawlessly." Harrison slammed his gavel down on the glass table. "The motion to revoke is denied. Upon her birthday next month, the shares will transfer to Victoria. This meeting is adjourned." Pandemonium broke out as Preston began screaming at his lawyers. But Ethan didn't hear it. He turned to look at Victoria. Tears were finally streaming down the Ice Queen's face, not out of fear, but out of profound, overwhelming relief. Ethan reached out, taking her trembling hand in his calloused one. They walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the corporate warfare behind them. They had a much more important meeting to attend anyway. They had a treehouse to finish building, and a son and daughter waiting for them to come home. Ethan started as a hired fake father, but he ended up giving Oliver, Chloe, and Victoria the greatest gift of all: an unbreakable, genuine family. Victoria finally learned that true wealth isn't protected by boardrooms or bank accounts, but built through honest, unconditional love. If you were moved by this incredible true-life drama, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing stories.